The monitors in room 412 had been singing the same flat song for 11 weeks. 11 weeks since Marcus Chen, the man who controlled Chicago's underground from his empire in the Korean Quarter, had taken 3 bullets meant for someone else. 11 weeks since the doctor stopped using words like recovery and started whispering comfort care to his second-in-command. Marcus was 38, had built a network that stretched from the docks to downtown, had men who would die for him and enemies who would kill for the chance, and none of it mattered now. He was just another body in a hospital bed, breathing because machines told him to. His suite at the Chen Tower sat empty. His rivals were circling like sharks, and David Park, the man who had stood beside him for 15 years, it was running out of ways to keep Marcus's empire from collapsing into chaos. Then on a rainy Tuesday night in the sealed 4th floor of Northwestern Memorial, where only authorized personnel were allowed, a nurse named Sarah Mitchell walked into Marcus's room and stopped dead. 2 children were sitting cross-legged on the floor beside his bed, a 7-year-old boy in a bright blue sweater, carefully adjusting the oxygen tube on Marcus's face with gentle fingers, and a 5-year-old girl in pink sitting perfectly still, watching with eyes too old for her face, as if she understood exactly what her brother was doing. Sarah didn't call security. She whispered, "What are you doing here?" The boy looked up without fear. "The tube was hurting him. I fixed it." The girl nodded seriously. "We're not supposed to be here, but he looks like our dad." Sarah stared at the boy's face, then at Marcus, and something cold ran down her spine because the resemblance wasn't vague. It was exact. Same eyes, same jaw, same everything. She should have called security immediately. She should have reported this breach. Instead, she looked at these 2 children, small, poorly dressed, clearly from foster care, and saw her own childhood. Alone. Invisible. Wishing someone would notice. 10 minutes, she said. Then you leave. She had no idea those 10 minutes would unlock a secret so deep that even Marcus Chen himself didn't know it existed. If this story's gripping you, hit that like button right now, share it with someone who needs hope tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let's go back to that rainy Tuesday night in room 412, where everything was about to change. Sarah stood with her back against the door, counting seconds in her head. She had given them 10 minutes, and the clock above Marcus's bed was ticking down mercilessly. The boy in blue, she would learn his name was Tyler, had finished adjusting the oxygen tube and was now sitting back on his heels, watching Marcus's face with an intensity that made Sarah's chest tight. The girl in pink, Lily, had pulled a worn crayon and a piece of paper from her pocket and was drawing something with fierce concentration. Tyler reached out and touched Marcus's hand. Not the tentative touch of a stranger, but the familiar touch of someone who belonged there. "Dad would want you to wake up," he said quietly. "He always said family comes first." Sarah's breath caught. Dad. The boy had said Dad. Lily held up her drawing. Yet it showed 3 people standing in front of a house. 1 person in a bed, 2 children holding hands, and underneath in careful printing, family. "When he wakes up, he'll see we're here," she said, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of a child who believed in miracles. Tyler stood, took his sister's hand, and walked to the door. As he passed Sarah, he stopped. "Thank you for not being mad. Most adults are mad." Then they were gone, slipping out the door like shadows, leaving behind only the drawing taped to the wall and the impossible feeling that something had shifted in the room. Sarah walked to Marcus's bedside and looked at the monitor. She looked once, then again, then she pulled up a chair and sat down, her eyes locked on the numbers. Marcus Chen's heart rate was 58 beats per minute. Stable, calm, peaceful. Oh, in 11 weeks of night shifts on this floor, Sarah had never seen it below 72. 72 was good, 75 was normal. There had been nights when it spiked to 95, sending her scrambling for the emergency button. But 58? 58 was the heart rate of someone resting, someone at peace, not someone fighting death. She sat there for 15 minutes, watching the number stay steady. Then she stood, walked into the hallway, leaned against the cold wall, and looked at her shaking hands. She had just let 2 unidentified children into the most protected patient's room in the hospital. She had bypassed security. She had broken every rule. If she was caught, she would lose her license. If Marcus's people found out, she might lose more than that. But Sarah Mitchell didn't regret it, because for the first time in 11 weeks, when Marcus Chen's heart had slowed down, as if it finally had a reason to rest. The children came back the next night, and the next, and the next. Sarah wasn't surprised. She had known they would return from the way Tyler had touched Marcus's hand, like someone saying goodbye but meaning see you soon. This time, she was ready. She studied the security schedules. She learned the guards' routines. She found the blind spots in the camera coverage. From 11 to 11:30 p.m., the 4th floor had minimal surveillance. The 2 guards outside Marcus's room took their breaks at staggered times. 30 minutes. That was all she needed. She met them at the service elevator on the 3rd floor. Tyler carried a small backpack. Lily clutched a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. 30 minutes, Sarah said. Not a second more. When I knock twice, you leave immediately. Tyler nodded. Lily held up 3 fingers. 30, she confirmed. That night, Tyler didn't just sit. He talked. He told Marcus about the foster home they lived in, about Mrs. Garcia who tried her best but had 12 other kids to watch, about how Lily still woke up crying sometimes because she missed their mom. He talked to Marcus like he was sitting across the breakfast table, not lying unconscious with tubes in his arms. Sarah stood guard at the door, her ears tuned to the hallway, but her heart was in that room. She realized Tyler didn't talk like a 7-year-old. He talked like someone who had learned to be grown up too fast, like someone who had practiced being brave. At the 25-minute mark, Lily stood up. She placed her stuffed rabbit on Marcus's chest and began to sing. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Her voice was small and clear, a little off-key, but filled with such pure love that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Lily wasn't performing. She was remembering. Her eyes were closed, her hands were clasped. Each word fell like a prayer. Tyler stopped talking and watched his sister. Then he looked at Marcus, and Sarah, peering through the crack in the door, saw it. On the monitor, the brainwave pattern that had been nearly flat for 11 weeks suddenly shifted. Not much, just a ripple. Then another, like a stone dropped in still water. Sarah stopped breathing. She wasn't a neurologist, but she had worked long enough to know that line wasn't supposed to move. Not for a patient the specialists had already written off. Lily finished the song and opened her eyes. Mom used to sing that, she whispered to Marcus. Her name was Jennifer. She sang it every night. Now she's gone, so I sing it for people who need to hear it. Sarah knocked twice on the doorframe. Time's up. The children left like they had arrived, quiet, quick, leaving no trace except the drawing on the wall and the rabbit on Marcus's chest. Let Sunshine stay with him, Lily whispered before leaving. He shouldn't be alone. On the fourth night, something changed. Maria Santos, the night security guard, was watching the monitors from her station when she saw them. Two small figures on the black and white screen riding the service elevator from the third floor to the fourth. The boy in blue, the girl in pink, moving with purpose. Maria leaned forward, her hand hovering over the call button to alert David Park, Marcus's second in command. Then the little girl looked up, straight into the camera. Lily didn't know it was a security camera. Maybe she thought it was just a light on the ceiling. But she smiled, a wide, open smile that reached her eyes, and she waved. She waved at a security camera monitoring one of Chicago's most dangerous men, like she was greeting a friend. Maria Santos, a former police officer who had seen things that would make most people sick, sat there staring at that tiny waving hand. She looked at her finger on the call button. Then she moved her hand away. She switched off the elevator camera feed, poured herself a cup of coffee, and turned her chair away from the monitors. Maria Santos hadn't seen anything. There were no children on the elevator. Nothing unusual had happened. At least that's what she would say if anyone asked. David Park wasn't a man who missed details. 15 years at Marcus Chen's side had taught him that everything was a threat until proven otherwise. And the crayon drawing taped to the wall of room 412 was the most unusual thing he had ever seen. He visited Marcus on Thursday morning as he did every day, carrying reports about the empire that was slowly crumbling without its leader. He sat in the chair beside the bed and began reading the numbers aloud, as if Marcus were in a board meeting instead of a coma. Then he looked up and saw it. The drawing. 3 people. A house. Someone in a bed. The word family scrawled underneath. David stood, walked closer, studied the drawing. Then he bent down and looked under the bed. He found 2 crayons, one blue, one pink, rolled under the bedside table. He didn't say a word. He placed the crayons on the table, stepped outside, and called Maria Santos in. "Has anyone entered this room besides the nursing staff?" Maria looked David straight in the eye. Her face was calm. "No one, sir." David held her gaze long enough to make an ordinary person sweat. Maria didn't blink. But David had survived 15 years in Marcus's world by trusting no one, not even the people on his payroll. That afternoon he returned with a camera smaller than a coin. He mounted it in the corner of the room, angled toward the door. That night David sat in his car in the parking garage, a tablet on his lap, and watched. At 11 p.m. the door opened. Nurse Sarah Mitchell entered first. Behind her came the 2 children. The boy in blue walked straight to the bed, checked Marcus's oxygen tube, adjusted it gently. The girl in pink sat on the floor and began to draw. David stared at the screen. Then he watched it again. Then he rewound and watched the part where Sarah opened the door. He watched it 3 times, his jaw tightening. The next morning, as Sarah was leaving her shift, David was waiting. "Come with me," he said. Not a request, an order. David led Sarah to a private conference room on the 4th floor, a room with no windows. He closed the door, sat down, placed the tablet on the table, and pressed play. Sarah saw herself on screen, leading Tyler and Lily into Marcus's room, clear as day, every second recorded. The blood drained from her face, but she didn't look away. She watched until the video ended, then looked at David. "Do you understand," David said, his voice low and dangerous, "that you just created a security breach that could get my boss killed? If 2 children can get in, one of Vincent Romano's men can get in too. You understand that?" "I understand," Sarah said. "And you still did it?" "Yes." "Why?" Sarah was silent for a moment, then, Because for 11 weeks you've spent millions on doctors and machines, and he's still lying there. 2 children come in, and for the first time his heart rate stabilizes, his brain waves shift. Do you want him safe while he dies, or do you want him to wake up? David didn't answer immediately. He studied Sarah the way he studied threats, looking for weakness, for lies, for a reason to end this. But he found none. The 29-year-old nurse with tired eyes and worn scrubs had nothing to hide. She was afraid, he could see that, but she didn't back down. "Who are the children?" David asked. "I don't know their last names. They're from foster care. Yeah, they say he looks like their father." David's eyes narrowed at that detail, but he didn't ask more. He opened a file on the tablet and scrolled through Marcus's vitals from the past 2 weeks. He wasn't a doctor, but he could read patterns. The heart rate had been gradually dropping, gradually stabilizing, especially between 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m., exactly when the children were there. He closed the tablet. "Here are the conditions," he said, his voice shifting into language that allowed no negotiation. "The children come on a schedule I control. I choose the time. I choose the duration. Maria stands guard while they're in the room. You are responsible for bringing them in and taking them out. If anyone outside this circle learns about this, anyone at all, you disappear. Not fired, not transferred, disappear." He slid a paper across the table, in a non-disclosure agreement. Sarah looked at it. She thought about her student loans, her tiny apartment, the job that kept her from drowning. Then she thought about Lily waving at a security camera, about Tyler adjusting an oxygen tube with gentle fingers, about the word family on that hospital wall. She picked up the pen and signed. David took the paper, folded it, put it in his jacket. He stood, opened the door. 11 o'clock tonight, 45 minutes, starting tonight. Sarah sat in that room for 5 minutes after David left. Her hands were clenched, her palms were sweating. She had just made a deal with the underworld. She had just put her life on the line. But when she finally stood and walked back into the hallway, the only thing on her mind was that tonight the children would have 45 minutes instead of 30. Oh, after David gave his approval, everything became official. No more sneaking, no more counting seconds. Maria opened the service elevator at 11 sharp. Sarah brought the children up. They spent 45 minutes in Marcus's room. Then Sarah took them back down. Everything was organized now, controlled. But what David hadn't anticipated was that 45 minutes each night wasn't enough to keep distance between Sarah and the children. It started with food. Sarah brought a pizza box one night, hiding it under her coat. When Lily opened it and smelled the cheese, her eyes went wide. "At the foster home," she said, mouth full, "we eat peanut butter sandwiches every day. Mrs. Garcia says peanut butter is healthy. But I think she says that because it's cheap." Tyler said nothing, but he ate 4 slices quickly and quietly, like someone who had learned to eat fast before food disappeared. From that night on, Sarah always brought something. Sometimes sandwiches, sometimes fruit, sometimes just cookies. She started arriving early, meeting the children at 10:30, sitting with them on the 3rd floor, eating together before going up to Marcus's room. Those 30 minutes on the 3rd floor became something all 3 of them waited for. Lily told stories about school, about how the other kids made fun of her clothes, about how she pretended not to care but it hurt. Sarah listened, laughed in the right places, asked the right questions. Lily talked more and more, like a door that hadn't been opened in years was finally swinging wide. Tyler was different. He didn't open up through words, he opened up through actions. One night he pulled out a math worksheet, division problems, half the page blank. Sarah didn't ask. She just sat closer, took out a pen, and worked through the first problem. Tyler watched, nodded, solved the second one himself. From that night on, math became another ritual. Sarah showed, Tyler followed. Lily drew flowers in the margins of his worksheet, which Tyler pretended to hate but never erased. Then came the hair. Lily's hair was a tangled mess that clearly no one at the foster home had time to properly care for. One night, Sarah brought a brush and hair ties, sat Lily on a bench and braided her hair into 2 neat pigtails. Lily touched her hair, her eyes lighting up. Then she turned to Sarah and said something that made Sarah grip the bench to keep from falling. "You look like my mom." Not "you look like a mom," but "you look like my mom," specific, direct. As if in Lily's mind, Sarah's face had perfectly overlaid the memory of Jennifer doing the same thing before the darkness took her forever. Sarah smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart." She held that smile until the children went into Marcus's room. Then she walked to the bathroom at the end of the hall, locked the door, sat on the toilet lid, and cried. She cried not because she was sad. She cried because she was 29, had been alone since her parents died, and no one had ever told her she looked like a mother. No one had ever looked at her and seen something something warm, something worthy of being compared to the most important person in their life. She cried for 3 minutes, washed her face, went back to work. No one knew. By the 4th week, Tyler began talking about his father, not all at once, in pieces, scattered between math problems and pizza slices. "My dad was a mechanic," he said one night, eyes on his worksheet. "He fixed cars, trucks, anything with an engine. He said if you understand how something works, you can fix anything." "Was your dad in Chicago?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice casual. "No, we lived in Milwaukee. Dad had a garage there. He taught me to change oil when I was 5, said I was never too young to learn." Sarah nodded, didn't rush him. She had learned that with children like Tyler, silence was worth more than questions. And she was right. Because a few nights later, when Lily had already run ahead to the elevator, Tyler lingered behind and spoke to Sarah in a voice so quiet she had to lean close to hear. "My dad said he had a brother. But his brother lived in a dangerous world. So Dad had to go far away." Tyler's hands twisted in his lap. "Dad said one day he would go back and bring his brother home. But he didn't make it." The boy didn't finish. He just tightened his grip on his backpack and walked to the elevator, leaving Sarah standing there with her heart pounding. Dangerous world. A brother. Didn't make it. That night, after the children returned to the foster home, Sarah sat in her car in the parking garage and searched. She typed in Tyler Chen, nothing. She typed in Lily Chen, nothing. But she remembered what Mrs. Garcia had told her, that the children had been transferred to Chicago from Milwaukee after their parents died in a car accident only 11 weeks earlier. That their mother's name had been Jennifer. That they had no known relatives. Sarah looked through her windshield at the hospital, got up to the 4th floor where Marcus Chen lay with drawings on his wall and a stuffed rabbit on his chest. The brother who lived in a dangerous world, the younger brother who ran away, the 2 children who said he looks like our dad. Sarah didn't have all the pieces yet, but she had enough instinct to know that Tyler and Lily's story wasn't a coincidence. And whatever secret lay between those 2 foster children and the Mafia boss on the 4th floor, it was bigger than anything she was ready to face. The 5th week began with a night unlike the others. Sarah knew something was wrong the moment she saw Lily at the elevator. The little girl didn't run to her like usual, didn't smile, didn't hold up Sunshine the rabbit to show off a new ribbon she had tied. Lily sat collapsed on the floor, knees drawn up, face buried, saying nothing. But Tyler stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, his eyes fixed on Sarah with that guarded look she had learned to recognize. The look that meant don't ask, while desperately hoping someone would. "What happened?" Sarah asked, sitting beside Lily. Tyler answered, his voice tight. "Kids at school teased Lily. Said our parents died because we were bad. Said no one will ever adopt us because we're cursed." Sarah felt heat rise in her chest, that helpless anger she knew too well, because she had once been that child, sitting folded in on herself, hearing those same words. She didn't say, "Don't listen to them." She knew those words were useless. Instead, she pulled Lily into her arms and said, "When I was your age, kids told me the same thing. I cried all night, but I'm still here. I'm okay. And you're going to be okay too." Lily said nothing, but her small hand clutched Sarah's scrubs and wouldn't let go. That night in Marcus's room, Lily didn't draw, didn't tell stories, didn't show off anything. She sat beside the bed with her hands clasped, and when it was time to sing, her voice was completely different, slower, smaller, trembling. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Each word fell heavily, like the song was no longer a ritual but a plea. Lily sang with her eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming down her face. Her voice broke on the line, "Please don't take my sunshine away," in a way that made Tyler turn away and made Sarah bite her lip so hard she nearly drew blood. Then it happened. On the hospital bed, Marcus Chen's right hand, the hand that had lain motionless for 11 weeks, moved. His fingers curled slightly, deliberately. It wasn't a reflex, it wasn't a spasm, but it was a slow, intentional movement, like someone in the darkness was trying to reach for something. Lily didn't see it. Her eyes were closed. Tyler didn't see it. He was looking at the wall, but Sarah saw. She stood at the door and watched all 5 of Marcus's fingers curl in, then stretch out, curl in, stretch out, slowly, weakly, like a flower trying to bloom under ice. Sarah rushed to the bedside. She looked at the monitor. The brainwave line was no longer flat. It was moving, rising and dipping distinctly, no longer faint ripples but actual waves, still small but continuous, like a brain trying to reconnect to a body after 11 weeks of separation. She hit the emergency call button immediately. Dr. James Morrison arrived within 15 minutes. His hair disheveled, glasses crooked, clearly pulled from bed. The children were already outside with Maria by the time he arrived. Morrison checked Marcus's pupils, tested his reflexes, studied the brainwave chart in silence for 5 full minutes. Then he looked at Sarah over his crooked glasses with the expression of a man staring at something that didn't belong in any medical textbook. "Progressive signs of neurological recovery," he said slowly, weighing every word. "Brainwaves shifting from delta to theta. Reflexes improved. Spontaneous movement in the right hand." He paused. "Miss Mitchell, over the past 11 weeks I have consulted 4 specialists and tried 3 neural stimulation protocols. None produced any meaningful result. Now, you tell me, what exactly have you been doing?" Sarah didn't answer directly, and she couldn't tell the doctor that 2 foster children had been sneaking in every night to draw, talk, and sing to a comatose Mafia boss. "I'm not sure, doctor," she said, "but it seems like repeated sound stimulation and familiar human voices may be creating a response." Morrison studied her for a few more seconds, not entirely convinced. But he was a scientist, and scientists follow data more than suspicion. "I don't know what you're doing," he said, but keep doing it. This is the first real signal in 11 weeks. Don't stop. Sarah nodded, waited until Morrison left, then texted David. His fingers moved, brainwaves changed. Doctor confirmed signs of recovery. David replied within a minute. Meet me tomorrow morning. Full report. But good news never travels alone. Northwestern Memorial had over 500 employees, and Vincent Romano only needed to buy one. Someone had seen Dr. Morrison rushing to the 4th floor at midnight. Someone had overheard whispers in the staff lounge that the VIP patient was showing signs. Someone had sent a text 3 nights later when Sarah stepped into the parking garage at 2 a.m. after her shift. A black sedan was parked sideways, blocking her car. A man leaned against the hood, arms crossed, wearing a leather jacket, his head shaved, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Pretty late for a nurse to be working so hard, he said, his voice carrying fake friendliness that made Sra's skin crawl. I don't know you. No need to, I'm just asking. That VIP patient on the 4th floor, still breathing? Sarah tightened her grip on her car keys in her coat pocket and pressed the unlock button without taking her hand out, and letting the beep beep tell him her car was right there and she could get in any time. I don't know any patient on the 4th floor. I work on the 2nd floor, pediatrics. The man looked at her for a few seconds, head tilted as if deciding whether she was worth pressing further. Then he pushed himself off the hood and stepped aside. Sleep well, nurse. Be careful driving home. Chicago isn't safe late at night. Sarah drove out of the garage with her hands trembling on the wheel, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror until the black sedan disappeared. She pulled over 2 blocks later, killed the engine, sat there breathing for 30 seconds before calling David. Someone asked about Marcus in the parking garage just now. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. The longest 3 seconds of Sarah's life. Then David spoke, his voice flat as a lake before a storm. Describe him, every detail. Sarah described the man. When she finished, David said nothing except one sentence before hanging up. Starting tomorrow night, Maria walks you to your car after every shift. Don't ever go into that parking garage alone again, ever. Sarah sat in the car for another 10 minutes after the call, staring through the windshield at the empty street. She thought about Lily sitting on the floor crying because other children had mocked her. She thought about Marcus's fingers curling when he heard the little girl's trembling voice. She thought about the bald man whose smile never reached his eyes. And she understood that she had stepped into a world with no easy way back out. But she understood something else too. Yet just as clearly as that heart rate of 58 on the monitor the first night. She wasn't going to stop. In the 6th week, Sarah began talking to Marcus. Not talking the way a nurse reports vitals or announces an IV change. Real talking. The kind that happens when the night is too late and exhaustion blurs every boundary. It began by accident that night. The children left earlier than usual because Tyler had developed a cough. And Sarah made him go back to the foster home to rest. Lily protested, her lower lip pushed out, but she followed her brother after Sarah promised to bring hot chocolate the next morning. Room 412 fell quiet again. There was only the steady rhythm of the monitor, the soft hum of the ventilation system, and Maria's footsteps in the hallway. And Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed, the chair where Tyler sat every night, and she didn't get back up. She was tired. 6 straight weeks of night shifts, 6 weeks of arriving early to meet the children, 6 weeks of carrying a secret heavier than any debt. She leaned her head against the bed rail, her cheek almost touching the white sheet, and looked at Marcus's face from closer than she ever had. He looked different from this distance. The sharp angles of his face softened in whatever state between life and death he was drifting through. "You know," Sarah said, her voice low enough not to carry into the hallway, "there are 2 little kids who come here every night because of you. They don't know who you are. They don't know what you've done. They don't know what people call you out there. They only know you look like their father. And that's enough for them to sneak past security, ride the service elevator, and sit here talking to you every night." She paused, listening to the steady monitor. "Your whole life, people have feared you. You know that, don't you? I look at those guards outside. I look at the way the doctors nod when David gives an order. I look at the way this entire 4th floor revolves around you. Like you're the center of the universe, but no one comes here because they love you. David comes because of loyalty. Maria comes because it's her job. The doctors come because they're being paid. Only those 2 children come because they want to, just because they want to." Sarah let out a soft laugh, the kind made from exhaustion mixed with something else she couldn't name. "And it's kind of funny, isn't it? You've been lying here for 11 weeks. And all that money, all those doctors, all those machines, none of it could wake you up. But one 5-year-old girl sings 'You Are My Sunshine' in a trembling voice, and your fingers move. If that isn't a miracle, I don't know what is." She sat in silence for a while, listening to her own breathing, listening to the machines, listening to the heavy stillness of the room. Then she remembered she needed to check his pulse. That was why she was sitting there, she told herself. A nurse checking vitals. Not someone staying behind to talk to a man in a coma. She reached out, placed 3 fingers against Marcus's wrist where the radial pulse beat, and began to count. The pulse was even, slow, stable. She had counted 15 seconds when Marcus's hand tightened. Not hard, not suddenly. His fingers simply began to close slowly, curling around the 3 fingers Sarah had resting at his wrist, holding them there, gently but unmistakably. Sarah went still. Her heart shot into her throat and began hammering wildly, as if trying to break out of her chest and run. She looked at his hand, holding hers. Then she looked at his face. Marcus's eyes were still closed, his face was still motionless. Not a single muscle had changed. But his hand was holding hers, and it didn't let go. Sarah didn't pull away. She didn't call a doctor. She didn't hit the nurse call button. She sat there with her hand inside Marcus Chen's hand, her heart racing, not from fear, but from something she wasn't ready to name. And she stayed that way until his fingers slowly released her. Almost a minute later, she drew her hand back, placed it in her lap, and stared at the 3 fingers, and still warm where he had touched them. She sat there another 5 minutes without saying a word. Then she stood and walked out. She told no one, not Maria, not David, not the children. She kept that moment for herself, like someone hiding a small flame in their palms without knowing whether to blow it out or let it burn. That same night on the other side of the city, David Park sat in the office behind Chen's restaurant in the Korean Quarter, phone pressed to his ear, his face expressionless, while his knuckles tapped faster and faster against the oak desk. The man on the other end was one of his contacts in the underworld network, an information broker who operated between factions on the west side. The man said Vincent Romano had raised the stakes. This was no longer a vague threat or a half-formed plan. Vincent had put $500,000 in cash on the table for anyone willing to finish Marcus Chen in his hospital bed. $500,000 was enough to buy the loyalty of a bodyguard, a nurse, a janitor, anyone who could walk through the door of room 412 and press a pillow over Marcus's face for 3 minutes. David hung up and sat still in the darkness of the office, staring at the black and white photograph on the wall. A picture of him and Marcus taken 15 years earlier, when they were both young and neither of them had blood on their hands. Time was running out. Marcus was showing signs of waking, but he wasn't awake yet, and until he opened his eyes and sat up, he was nothing more than a target lying still in a bed, protected by a shrinking circle of people and surrounded by enemies who grew more numerous by day. And David picked up the phone and called Maria. "Double the guards on the 4th floor starting tomorrow night. No one gets in unless they're on the list. I approve, no one." Then he made a second call to a man he rarely contacted, a lawyer who handled the kind of problems that never made it to court. "Vincent Romano," David said. Only those 2 words, and the man on the other end understood. The fight for Marcus Chen's life was no longer happening only inside the hospital room. It was spreading into the streets, and the darkness was coming closer every night. In the 7th week, Lily brought another drawing, not a hurried crayon sketch on scrap paper like the earlier ones. This one she had drawn at the foster home on clean white paper her teacher had given her during art class. She had worked on it for 3 days. Tyler told Sarah when they met at the elevator, his voice carrying something unusual, half pride, half worry, as if he knew this drawing was different but didn't know where it might lead. The picture had 5 people in it. In the center was a man lying in a bed, eyes closed, dark hair. Lily had written beside him in her careful printing, "He's sleeping." On the left was a woman in scrubs, brown hair tied up, labeled Miss Sarah. On the right were 2 children holding hands, a boy and a girl, no names needed because they were clearly Tyler and Lily. Between the 2 children was a small brown circle with 2 black dots for eyes. Sunshine the rabbit, drawn at 1/3 the size of a real person, as if the stuffed animal were an official and indispensable member of the household. Underneath the drawing, Lily had written 2 large words in thick pink crayon, pressing so hard the paper was nearly torn through. "Our family." When they entered room 412, Lily didn't run to the bed like she usually did. She walked straight to the wall opposite it, where the first family drawing had been taped since the 1st week, and carefully placed the new drawing right beside it, using medical tape in 4 small strips, 1 for each corner. Exactly the way Sarah had once taped down IV lines for patients. "The old picture was the family I dreamed about," Lily said, smoothing the edge of the paper with her hand. "This one is my real family." Sarah stood in the doorway, biting her lip. She looked at the drawing, looked at the woman in scrubs labeled with her name, and she had to swallow the tight ache in her throat before it turned into tears. Tyler sat in his usual chair, but tonight he didn't pull out his math worksheet. The backpack stayed at his feet. He looked at Marcus quieter than usual, his dark eyes carrying something restless behind them, as if he were struggling with a decision. Lily began to sing, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice tonight was clear and steady, not trembling like the week before, as if the Our Family drawing had given her something to hold on to. She sang through the song, then started it again, softer this time. Slower, like a lullaby, and while Lily sang, Tyler did something he had never done before. He reached out, took Marcus's right hand, the hand that had once curled when Lily sang, and held it tightly. Then he bent down, his lips near Marcus's ear, and whispered. His voice was so soft that Sarah, standing at the door, he had to stop breathing to hear it. "My dad said his brother was very strong. He said his brother was stronger than anyone he'd ever met." If you're my dad's brother, then you have to wake up. My dad didn't make it back to come get you, but we're here. We came instead of him. 1 second passed. 2 seconds. The monitor kept sounding its steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Then the wave on the screen jumped. Not a faint ripple like the weeks before, a strong, unmistakable surge, followed by a second, then a third, one after another. The monitor's beeping changed pace, faster now, more urgent, and Sarah rushed into the room because every instinct she had as a nurse told her that something was happening. Something good or something terrible. But something was happening right now. Then Marcus Chen opened his eyes, not slowly, not with a few blinks before slipping shut again like a reflex. His eyes opened, and for the first few seconds they were clouded. Then they began to focus, to find their point, like a camera pulling itself back into sharpness after being powered off for 11 weeks. The first thing Marcus Chen saw when he returned to the world was Tyler's face. A 7-year-old boy, solemn dark eyes, the line of a square jaw, a straight nose. Every feature sharp and painfully familiar. Marcus looked at the boy, his lips moved, dry and split after 11 weeks of disuse. And a sound came out, hoarse and broken but unmistakable. Daniel! Tyler went rigid. His hand was still wrapped around Marcus's, but his whole body started to shake, his eyes widened. And because the man he had been talking to and holding hands with for 7 weeks had just opened his eyes, had just looked at him, had just called him by a name he didn't know. And yet that voice, that ragged, broken voice, sounded so much like his father's that the boy burst into tears before he even understood why. Lily cried out, not in fear, but with the shout of a 5-year-old who had just been proven right that miracles were real. "He's awake, Miss Sarah, he's awake!" She ran to the bed and threw her arms around Marcus's left arm, burying her face in the crook of his elbow. Sunshine trapped between her and the side rail. She laughed while tears streamed down her cheeks, that impossible mix of sobbing and joy that only children can do with such fierce honesty. Sarah hurried to the bedside, checked Marcus's pupils, checked his breathing, and hit the call button for the doctor with one hand, while saying, "Mr. Chen, can you hear me? Can you follow my finger?" But her hands were shaking, and her voice was too, because she was a nurse, yes, but she was also the woman who had sat beside this bed talking into the silence night after night. And now the man in that bed had opened his eyes. Maria heard Lily shout, shoved the door open, one hand already at her belt by reflex, then stopped dead when she saw Marcus looking around the room with his eyes open. She pulled out her phone, dialed David, and said exactly 4 words, "He's awake." The 4th floor erupted over the next 15 minutes. Dr. Morrison came running faster this time because Maria had used the priority line David had arranged. But the nurse on duty rushed in and was blocked at the door by Maria because the children were still inside the room. David drove from Chen's restaurant to the hospital in 12 minutes, running at least 3 red lights. But before all those people arrived, in that brief pocket of silence, when only Sarah, Tyler, and Lily were in the room, Marcus Chen looked at Sarah. His eyes were still blurred, still trying to reclaim the world after 11 weeks of darkness. But he looked at her and spoke, his voice rough as gravel crushed beneath wheels. "I heard them." Sarah leaned closer. "Heard who?" "In the dark. I heard singing every night, and someone talking to me. Someone was telling me stories." Marcus swallowed hard in pain. That was what pulled me back. I kept following those voices. Every night they came a little closer. But then tonight he said, "You have to wake up." And I did. Sarah looked down at Lily clinging to his arm, looked at Tyler standing beside the bed with tears running down his face that he didn't even bother to wipe away. Then looked back at Marcus. She said nothing. She simply placed one hand on Lily's shoulder and the other on Tyler's, and let those 3 small flames burn in silence, lighting the room the darkness had finally retreated from after 11 long months. In the first days after waking up, Marcus Chen hardly spoke at all. He lay in bed with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling or at the Our Family drawing on the wall across from him, and stayed silent. His body was still so weak that even lifting his head from the pillow made him dizzy. Dr. Morrison said recovery after 11 weeks in a coma would take many weeks, maybe many months, that his muscles had wasted, his nervous system needed to reconnect, and patience was the one thing nobody could sell. But Marcus's mind didn't need recovery. He was awake, sharp, and the first thing he asked David when his second-in-command stepped into the room the next morning wasn't about the Empire, wasn't about Vincent, wasn't about the territory they had lost. "The 2 kids," Marcus said, his voice still rough but clearer than it had been the night before. "Find out who they are." David nodded and didn't ask another question. He had seen Marcus look at the dark-eyed boy and say Daniel the night before. He had seen the look on Marcus's face then, and 15 years beside his boss had taught him that when Marcus Chen used that tone to give an order, it wasn't an ordinary order. It was personal. David started at the hospital. Maria confirmed that the children came from Bright Futures foster home in River North, 4 blocks from Northwestern Memorial. David contacted the director, Mrs. Garcia, a 62-year-old woman with short gray hair and the voice of someone who had raised too many children and managed to keep none of them. She provided the basic information. Tyler Chen, 7 years old. Lily Chen, 5. Mother, Jennifer Chen, deceased. Father, unknown in the foster care records. The children had been transferred by Illinois DCFS back to Chicago from Milwaukee only 11 weeks earlier after both parents died in a car accident. Their mother had been originally from Chicago, but child welfare had found no maternal relatives. The foster care file ended there. But David Park wasn't a man who stopped at a foster care file. He contacted one of his men in Milwaukee, a former police officer who specialized in digging up records for people who didn't want to leave a trail. 2 days later, he received scanned copies of Tyler and Lily's original birth certificates, the versions on file at the county records office in Milwaukee County. The versions that hadn't been altered hadn't been shortened when they passed through the DCFS system. The certificates listed the father as Daniel James Chen, but the investigators' deep dive uncovered a sealed name change decree linking him back to his birth identity, Daniel James Chen, brother of Marcus Chen. David sat in his car outside the hospital staring at that name on his phone screen and didn't move for 2 full minutes. Daniel, Marcus's younger brother, the brother who had run away 12 years earlier. Before Tyler was even born, cut off all contact, taken his wife's last name, lived under the name Chen in Milwaukee as if the connection to Marcus had never existed. And now Daniel was dead. Only 11 weeks ago, dead on a Milwaukee highway with his wife, leaving behind 2 children nobody knew carried Chen blood, drifting through the foster care system and then all the way back to Chicago into a foster home 4 blocks from the hospital, and somehow finding their way to room 412 where their uncle had been lying in a coma. David walked into Marcus's room, closed the door, and signaled for Maria to stay outside. He pulled up a chair beside the bed and placed the phone in front of Marcus, the screen displaying the scanned birth certificate. "Father's name," David said without circling around it. Daniel James Chen. Marcus looked at the screen. He read that line once, twice, 3 times. Then he turned his face toward the wall. His shoulders shook. Not from weakness, not from cold, but with the kind of shaking that comes from a 38-year-old man who had never cried in front of anyone and was trying to hold himself together and failing. "He left because of me," Marcus said, his voice thick, his face still turned to the wall. "He hated the world I lived in so much he changed his name, took his wife's name, hid his kids, lived like I didn't exist. And he died 11 weeks ago. Died and I never knew. David, my brother, died and I never knew." David sat in silence. He didn't offer comfort because he wasn't the kind of man who comforted, and Marcus wasn't the kind of man who needed it. He simply sat there and let his boss cry, yet for the first time in the 15 years he had known him. And he kept the door closed until Marcus's shoulders stopped shaking. 10 minutes later, Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, turned to look at David again, his eyes red but his voice hard once more. "Call the nurse in." Sarah stepped into the room 10 minutes after Maria summoned her. She was still wearing her night shift scrubs, her hair tied up, dark circles beneath her eyes. And she knew the moment she looked at Marcus's face that he knew. Knew what? She wasn't entirely sure yet, but he knew something, and it had hurt him. "How long have you known?" Marcus asked, looking straight into Sarah's eyes. "Known what? Don't play that game with me. The kids. You knew who they were. You knew from the beginning and still let them into the room of a Mafia boss. Why?" Sarah held his stare without blinking. "I didn't know who they were. I still don't know who they are. All I know is that they're 2 lonely children in foster care who snuck past security every night just to sit beside a lonely man in a hospital bed. I don't care who you are outside this hospital." "You should care," Marcus said, his voice dropping lower. "People near me get hurt. I lost my brother because he was near me. Now his children are here and you're here. Do you really not understand how dangerous that is?" Sarah was silent for 3 seconds. Then she spoke, her voice flat and clear. "Then send me away. Send the children away too. You're good at that, aren't you? Pushing people out of your life. Your brother left because of you. That's what you just said. Now you want to do the same thing to your own niece and nephew." The words hung in the air of room 412 like a bullet frozen in flight. Marcus looked at Sarah and Sarah looked back and neither of them moved. Then Marcus shifted his gaze to the R family drawing on the wall. 5 crayon figures. He's sleeping. Miss Sarah, Tyler, Lily, Sunshine. He stared at that drawing for so long that Sarah thought he might have forgotten she was even standing there. Then he spoke, not looking at her but at the drawing. "David." David stepped in at once, clearly having been right outside the door. "Protect the kids at any cost." David nodded. "And the nurse?" A few seconds of silence. Marcus was still staring at the drawing when he answered. "Her too." 3 weeks after waking up, Marcus Chen was able to sit up in bed without help, hold a spoon, and eat on his own, even though his hands still trembled slightly. He could walk 12 steps from the bed to the window before his legs gave out. 12 steps. He knew the exact number because Lily counted for him every day. 10, 11, 12. "Wow, Uncle Marcus, you did one more than yesterday." She sat on the floor at the end of the room with Sunshine in her lap, clapping both hands every time Marcus managed one more step, like a 5-year-old coach whose salary was pizza and hot chocolate. Marcus, a man whose mere presence had once been enough to silence entire streets in Chicago, realized that he was pushing himself farther each day, not because Dr. Morrison told him to practice, but because he didn't want to see Lily's face fall if he did less than the day before. Tyler was quieter. Ever since the night Marcus woke up, the boy had grown more withdrawn, not out of distance, but because he was trying to process something too large for a 7-year-old. He knew Marcus had called him Daniel the moment he opened his eyes. He knew Daniel was his father's name. And hearing it from Marcus's lips made the connection feel blood deep. The boy didn't ask. He simply brought his math worksheet every evening and kept working because solving problems didn't require anyone to explain anything. Life in room 412 was beginning to find a new rhythm. Slow and careful, but warmer than anything that room had ever held before. And then Tuesday of the 10th week arrived and everything shattered. Vincent Romano had learned that Marcus was awake. That news spread through the Chicago underworld faster than any newspaper ever could, and Vincent understood better than anyone that his window of opportunity was closing. Marcus Chen in a hospital bed was a target. Marcus Chen standing on his own 2 feet was a death sentence for anyone who had touched his empire during those 11 weeks. Vincent didn't strike at Marcus. He struck at the one thing Marcus had only just begun to have again. That morning, a black sedan pulled up outside Bright Futures in River North. 2 men stepped out, dressed in gray suits carrying leather briefcases, wearing the polished and professional manner of government workers. They met Mrs. Garcia in the reception room and presented documents printed on Illinois DCFS letterhead, complete with seals, signatures, and case numbers, along with an emergency transfer order for 2 children, Tyler Chen and Lily Chen, Mrs. Miss Garcia read the papers and frowned. A transfer? For what reason? Routine reevaluation of living environment, the first man said in that smooth, exhausted tone of someone who had explained the same thing 100 times already. The children are being moved to a facility on the north side to be closer to a new school. Standard procedure. Mrs. Garcia looked at the DCFS hotline number printed on the form. I need to verify this. Of course. Mrs. Garcia called the number listed on the paper. A professional-sounding woman answered, identified herself as an employee from the Cook County DCFS branch, confirmed the transfer order, and repeated the case number exactly as it appeared on the form. Mrs. Garcia had no reason to be suspicious. DCFS moved children between facilities every month, and it was such a common part of the American foster care system that it had long since become its own kind of heartbreak. She called Tyler and Lily downstairs. Lily clutched Sunshine, her eyes uneasy. Where are we going, Mrs. Garcia? You're going somewhere new for a little while, Mrs. Garcia said, trying to keep her voice steady even though she hated saying those words. Words she had spoken to too many children over 25 years in the job. It'll be okay. Tyler said nothing. The boy looked at the 2 men in suits, looked at the black sedan outside, and tightened his grip on his sister's hand. The children were taken away at 10 o'clock in the morning. 4 hours later, Sarah arrived at Bright Futures, and she was carrying a paper bag with 2 cartons of hot chocolate and a pack of cookies, the snack Lily called the best cookies in the universe. She knocked on the reception room door and asked Mrs. Garcia if she could see the children. Mrs. Garcia looked at her, her face sinking. Sarah, DCFS came this morning, a transfer. I released Tyler and Lily to them. Sarah stood still, the paper bag in her hand lowered slowly. A transfer? Transferred where? A facility on the north side, they said. I have the paperwork here. Mrs. Garcia handed her the copy. Sarah looked at the letterhead, the seal, the phone number. Then she took out her own phone, opened a browser, found the official Illinois DCFS hotline number on the state website and called. I need to verify a transfer order for 2 children, Tyler Chen and Lily Chen. A case number. She read off the number from the paper. Silence on the other end. Then the DCFS employee said, Ma'am, there is no transfer order for these 2 children in the system. The case number you just gave me doesn't exist. The blood drained from Sarah's face. She looked at Mrs. Garcia. Mrs. Garcia looked back, her eyes widening as the truth of what had happened settled in. Sarah, I called to verify. They confirmed everything. A fake number, Sarah said, her voice flat because if she let emotion slip into it right then, she would scream. Fake papers, fake seal, fake phone number. You handed those children over to kidnappers. Mrs. Garcia leaned back against the wall, one hand gripping the edge of the desk, her face gone white. Sarah didn't stay another second. She turned, ran out the door, and called David as she sprinted to her car. The children were taken, Vincent's people, this morning, 4 hours ago. David said nothing for 3 seconds, the longest 3 seconds of Sarah's life. Then he said, I'll handle it. Get to the hospital now. When Sarah reached room 412, she saw something she would never forget. Marcus Chen was standing in the middle of the room, not taking 12 trembling steps from the bed to the window, standing upright, both hands braced on the rolling IV pole, his face gray with pain, but his eyes burning. Dr. Morrison stood beside him with both hands raised, as if trying to hold back a collapsing wall. Mr. Chen, you can't go. Your body isn't ready. You'll fall. Marcus looked at the doctor with the same gaze that 15 years earlier had made debtors shake and beg, and the gaze of a man who controlled Chicago's underground. And he said in a voice that allowed no argument, My niece and nephew are out there, move. Then he turned to David, who had just entered the room with a phone pressed to his ear, issuing orders across the entire network. Find them, David. Find them no matter what it takes. If they lay a hand on those children, I'll burn Chicago to the ground. David Park turned the 4th floor duty room into a command center within 20 minutes. 3 phones on the table, 2 tablets displaying maps of Chicago, and 4 men Sarah had never seen before, appearing from somewhere as if they had always existed in the shadows waiting to be called. David activated his network on the streets, the unofficial eyes scattered across the city that he had spent 15 years building with patient care. Someone in River North had seen the black sedan turn onto Ontario that morning. Someone in Streeterville had seen the same car parked at a gas station on Michigan Avenue. 2 men in suits going inside to buy water. 2 children sitting in the back seat. David cross-checked that with traffic cameras one of his people could access unofficially, and the vehicle had gone south through the loop, turned into the abandoned industrial zone on the south side, and vanished from camera range at the intersection of Halstead and 35th Street. The old warehouse district. David knew that area. Vincent Romano had used a transit point there 3 years earlier before Marcus drove him out. Vincent's old warehouse on 37th Street, David said, marking the map. 35 minutes from here. Marcus had changed clothes. No one knew where he had gotten them. Maybe Maria had brought them down from his penthouse. But he stood in the middle of the duty room in a black dress shirt and dark slacks. And if you didn't notice the way he gripped the edge of the table to keep his balance, he looked more like a boss preparing for war than a patient who had only woken up 3 weeks ago. I'm going, Marcus said, his voice leaving no room for debate. David looked at him for 3 seconds, then nodded. Because 15 years had taught him the difference between when Marcus was giving an order and when he was delivering a fact. And this was a fact. Sarah stood in the corner of the room listening to everything, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. When David began assigning men, she stepped forward. I'm coming too. The whole room turned to look at her. David frowned, but Maria tilted her head. Marcus looked at her as if she had just announced she intended to jump off a building. No, David said shortly. The kids have been locked in a dark room by strange men all day, Sarah said, her voice fast but clear. When that door opens, if the first thing they see is more strange men with guns, Lily will panic and Tyler will fight. That boy will throw himself at armed men because he'll protect his sister no matter what. And somebody will react the wrong way and a 7-year-old child will get hurt. They need to see my face, not men with guns. Silence followed. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time since waking up, he looked at her not the way he looked at a nurse, not the way he looked at a stranger, but the way he looked at someone he was trying to understand and couldn't quite manage. You're actually crazy, he said. And you actually need me right now, Sarah answered. Marcus looked at David. David looked at Sarah. Then David exhaled through his nose and said, You stay in the car until I signal. Not before that. Never before that. 3 black SUVs left Northwestern Memorial at 9 o'clock that night. Marcus sat in the back seat of the middle car, and Sarah sat beside him. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the city moving past the window. But Sarah noticed his hand clenched tight on his thigh, the knuckles white. And she understood that beneath the cold exterior of the man who controlled Chicago's underground, Marcus Chen was afraid. Not afraid of his enemies, afraid of losing his niece and nephew. The warehouse on 37th Street was a gray slab of concrete sitting behind barbed wire and a vacant lot choked with trash. The vehicle stopped 200 meters away. David's men moved through the darkness like shadows that had trained all their lives for this moment. David directed them through an earpiece, his voice flat, precise, not a wasted word. Maria led the first team through the front entrance. The second team circled to the rear. Everything happened quickly, not the way it happens in movies. No drawn-out explosions, no dramatic speeches, only the sound of a door being kicked in. A few short shouts, the thud of struggle, then silence. Maria's voice came through the earpiece. Clear. 2 children in the basement, alive. David opened the car door, looked at Sarah and nodded. Sarah ran. She didn't remember how many times her feet touched the ground between the SUV and the warehouse door. She only remembered darkness, the smell of damp concrete, near the stairs leading down into the basement, and Maria's flashlight sweeping across the small room below. Lily was curled up in the corner, her back pressed to the wall. Sunshine crushed against her chest, her eyes squeezed shut, and she was crying without sound. The kind of crying only children who have learned that no one comes when they cry loudly know how to do. In front of Lily, Tyler stood with his arms spread wide, his back to his sister, his face toward the door in exactly the same posture he had taken at the door of room 412 on that first night. Arms spread to protect her, but this time not from a nurse, from kidnappers. And the 7-year-old boy had stood like that all day long. Tyler! Lily! Lily opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw wasn't strange men with guns. It was Sarah, Miss Sarah in white scrubs, hair tied up, running down the stairs with both arms open, Miss Sarah? Lily shot out of the corner like a tiny golden bullet and slammed into Sarah, both arms locking around her neck, her face buried in Sarah's shoulder. And for the first time since morning, she cried out loud, cried hard, cried with no restraint at all. The way a child cries only when she is finally allowed to be afraid. Tyler lowered his arms. His whole body trembled from holding himself tight for too long, and when he saw Sarah holding Lily, he didn't run to her. He stayed there, legs shaking, eyes red, looking toward the doorway. Marcus came down the last steps, one hand braced against the wall because his legs were almost unable to hold him. Maria moving behind him to help, but Marcus slapped Maria's hand away. He stepped into the room and Tyler saw him. Yet the boy, the child who had stood with his arms spread protecting his sister in front of kidnappers all day without crying, saw Marcus Chen step into that dark room and his lips trembled. Uncle Marcus. It was the first time he had called him by name. Not the sleeping man, not him, not the man who looks like Dad. Uncle Marcus. Marcus dropped to his knees, not because he meant to kneel, but because his legs gave out. Yet once his knees hit the cold concrete floor, it didn't matter anymore. Because Tyler hurled himself into Marcus's chest, and Lily let go of Sarah and ran into his arms too, and Marcus Chen held his orphaned niece and nephew with both arms that were still weak after 11 weeks in a coma. Held them so tightly that he shook and whispered into their hair, "I'm here now. I'm here now. No one will touch you again." Sarah stepped back, her spine against the wall, both arms wrapped around herself, and watched that scene through tears she didn't bother to wipe away. Maria stood in the doorway and turned her face aside, jaw clenched. Upstairs on the main floor, David dragged Vincent Romano out from a back room in the warehouse. Vincent's hands were tied, his face bruised, his shirt torn, but he was still smiling. The smile of a man who knew he had lost and refused to admit it. David shoved him down into a metal chair in the center of the warehouse and waited. 10 minutes later, Marcus came up from the basement, Lily in his left arm, Tyler holding his right hand. He placed Lily in Sarah's arms, told Sarah to take the children to the car, then turned and looked at Vincent. But he stepped in front of the man who had nearly taken the only things his brother had left behind. And he stood there in silence for a long time. Vincent lifted his head and bared his teeth in a grin. "Kill me. I know you want to." Marcus looked at him. Then he looked toward the door where Sarah was carrying Lily out, where Tyler turned back for one last glance before getting into the car. "Before today," Marcus said, his voice low and slow, "I would have killed you, and you know I would have done it." He turned his eyes back to Vincent. "But today I want my children to know I chose differently." Marcus walked out of the warehouse without turning back. David stayed behind to deal with Vincent Romano in the way the underworld dealt with men like him. Not death, but something that would make sure Vincent would never again lay a hand on the Chen family. In the car back to the hospital, Lily slept in Sarah's lap, sunshine squashed between them, dried tear tracks still on her cheeks. Tyler sat beside Marcus without saying a word, but his hand held tight to his uncle's and never let go the whole way back. After the rescue night, Marcus didn't allow the children to return to bright futures. He called his lawyer the very next morning and petitioned for an emergency temporary guardianship order on the grounds that the children were his biological niece and nephew, and that the foster home had allowed a serious security breach to happen. The Cook County Court granted the temporary order within 48 hours. Tyler and Lily moved into room 412 to stay with Marcus at the hospital. and the locked-down VIP room of a Mafia boss suddenly became the strangest thing Northwestern Memorial had ever seen. A hospital room with crayons under the bed, a stuffed rabbit on the pillow, drawings covering the walls, and a 5-year-old girl ordering the patient to walk 25 steps a day instead of 12. Marcus recovered better than Dr. Morrison had predicted in any of his estimates. 25 steps became 50. 50 became 100. And by the third month after waking up, he could walk the full length of the 4th-floor hallway and back again, without needing to brace himself against the wall. Morrison said medicine could explain part of it, that the body recovered when the brain had a reason to keep going. But he also added with a rare smile that he had no protocol for the rest of it, on only the observation that every time Lily shouted, "One more step, Uncle Marcus, don't be lazy!" Marcus Chen, a man who had once taken 3 bullets without flinching, would take one more step. Tyler opened up slowly in the way only Tyler could, not through declarations but through small fragments that slipped out during silence. One afternoon, Marcus was sitting in a chair by the window working on flexing and straightening his legs. Tyler was on the floor working on his math worksheet, and without looking up, the boy suddenly said, "My dad made beautiful things. He fixed cars, but he also built furniture. He used oak, planed it by hand, never with a machine. Dad said things made by hand have a soul." Marcus stopped exercising. He looked at the top of the boy's head and said nothing, only listened. "Oh, Dad taught me to fish in the lake behind our house. Base," he said. "You have to be patient. Sit still. Wait." He was really good at fishing, but he always caught them and let them go. I asked why he let them go, and Dad said, "Because I only wanted to know they were still there. I didn't need to keep them." Marcus swallowed hard. He looked out the window at the gray Chicago skyline and imagined a lake in Milwaukee he had never seen, where his younger brother sat fishing with his little boy, peaceful and far from the darkness Marcus himself had created. "Did your dad talk about me much?" Marcus asked in the gentlest voice he could manage. Tyler was quiet for a while. Dad said he had a brother. He said his brother was lost in the dark, but one day he'd find the light. Dad always said, "One day my brother will find the light." Every time he said that, he looked out the window, and I knew he was remembering. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't, because if he had opened his mouth right then, his voice would have broken, and he didn't want to break in front of the boy. He only gave a small nod, rested his hand on Tyler's head for 1 second, then went back to flexing and straightening his legs. That night, when the children were asleep on the extra bed the hospital had brought into the room, Lily curled around Sunshine, Tyler lying straight with his math worksheet folded face down on his chest. Marcus pushed his IV pole out onto the small balcony just beyond the window of room 412. He stood there in the Chicago night wind, looking down at the city he had once ruled, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Daniel. And I'm sorry you had to leave. I'm sorry you had to change your name, hide your children, live as though I didn't exist. I'm sorry I didn't know you died, but your children are here, Daniel. They're safe, and I'll keep them safe, I promise." The wind moved across the balcony, cold and carrying the smell of the Chicago River, and Marcus stood there until his shoulders stopped shaking before he went back inside. Sarah saw him when she came in to check his vitals on the night shift. He was sitting in the chair beside the children's bed, Sunshine in his lap because Lily had rolled out of the blankets and dropped the rabbit onto the floor, and Marcus had picked him up and kept him there. Sarah stood in the doorway, about to turn back because the vital check could wait, but Marcus saw her. "Come in," he said softly, so he wouldn't wake the children. Sarah stepped inside, checked the monitor out of habit, and wrote down the numbers on the chart. Then she started to leave. "Sarah," she stopped. It was only the second time he had called her by name, and each time it made her stop walking. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Sarah turned and looked at him. A 38-year-old man sitting in the dark, holding his niece's worn, stuffed rabbit, asking her why she wasn't afraid of him. "Because you're holding Lily's rabbit while you ask me that," Sarah answered. Marcus looked down at Sunshine in his lap, and Sarah saw something on his face that she had never seen since the day he woke up. A smile, small, only the corner of his mouth lifting, but real. "Stay a little while," he said. Sarah sat down in the chair across from him, but they sat in the darkness of room 412, listening to Lily breathing evenly, listening to Tyler shift in his sleep, listening to the city murmuring outside the window. Then Marcus reached out and took Sarah's hand. Not the unconscious tightening from when he had still been in a coma. He held it deliberately, gently, and looked straight into her eyes as he said, "I'm not a good man, Sarah. You know who I am. You know what I've done. I don't deserve the children, and I definitely don't deserve you. But you and the children make me want to try. For the first time in my life, I want to try to become someone else." Sarah didn't pull her hand away. She let her hand remain in his, warm and still, and gave a small nod. Nothing else needed to be said. The next morning, Marcus met with David in the duty room. The door was closed. Except Maria standing outside. "I'm getting out," Marcus said. David didn't blink. "Out of what?" "Everything. All illegal operations. Transfer the territories. Keep the legitimate businesses, the restaurants, the investments. The rest ends now." David sat in silence for 10 seconds. Long enough for Marcus to know he was truly thinking it through and not simply obeying by reflex. 15 years, David said. "I've followed you for 15 years since the days when we had nothing but our bare hands and a gun hidden in the trunk. If you're asking whether I'm still with you, then the answer is the same as it was 15 years ago. If this is your choice, I'm still with you." Marcus nodded. "It is my choice." David stood, opened the door, and before stepping out, he turned back and added one more sentence, his voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it. "Daniel would have been glad to know this." Marcus didn't answer. He only looked out the window toward the Chicago sky, growing brighter by the minute, and for the first time that light didn't make him squint. Felicity Crane was the kind of lawyer people didn't find on Google. She worked out of a small office on the 15th floor of a building in the Loop with no sign, no website, no advertising, and a client list she would carry with her to the grave. David introduced her to Marcus in the 5th month after he woke up, when the temporary guardianship order was close to expiring and the formal adoption process had to begin before DCFS could return the children to the system. "I don't take cases I don't believe I can win," Felicity said when she first met Marcus in the hospital's private conference room. Her voice sharp as a paper cut. "Your case is complicated. You're a single man, you have no experience raising children, and your past is, let me be blunt, if someone digs in the right place, that courtroom will turn into a torture chamber." "No one will dig up anything," David said from the corner of the room, his voice flat. Felicity looked at David for 3 seconds, understood what he meant, then turned back to Marcus. "Federal background checks, criminal records review, financial verification, home study, psychological interviews, environmental assessment, every part of it has to be clean. Not clean on the surface. Be clean enough that a family court judge in Cook County looks at it and has not one question left to ask." Marcus nodded. Do it, Felicity began. The federal background check found nothing. On paper, Marcus Chen was the president of Chen Holdings, a completely legitimate restaurant and investment corporation, fully tax compliant with no criminal record and no formal charges. His underworld empire had always operated through layers of insulation David had built over 15 years. And now David had scrubbed away the last of those layers. The home study was the part Marcus feared most, not because he was afraid of failing, but because he didn't know what home meant. He had lived in the penthouse at the top of Chen Tower for 12 years, a place made of glass and steel with nothing in it except expensive liquor and conference tables. But that wasn't a place to raise children. Sarah was the one who found the house. She drove through Lincoln Park one Sunday afternoon, saw a for sale sign in front of a 2-story red brick house with hydrangeas blooming in the front yard and a white wooden fence, and took a picture to send to Marcus. He looked at the photo, then looked at Sarah. "There's a garden for Lily to plant flowers," Sarah said. "There's a backyard big enough for Tyler to have a dog. There's a good public elementary school 2 blocks away. And it looks like a home, not a headquarters." Marcus bought the house within a week. David arranged the furniture, but Sarah made the choices. Tyler's room had oak bookshelves running along the wall because Sarah remembered the boy talking about how Daniel had built bookshelves out of oak by hand. Lily's room had pale yellow walls because Lily said yellow was the color of happiness. When the DCFS home study worker came to inspect, she looked around the house, looked at the children's bedrooms, looked at the yard, looked at the refrigerator full of food, and wrote in her report, "Suitable living environment. Applicant demonstrates clear commitment to the children's needs." The adoption hearing took place on a Wednesday morning at the Cook County Family Courthouse, 15th floor, courtroom 15. Marcus wore a gray suit, not the kind he wore when he ran an empire, but the kind Sarah had chosen for him. Simple, well-fitted, making him look more like a father going to a school meeting than a mafia boss. Felicity presented the file. Blood relationship had been confirmed by DNA testing. Marcus was the children's biological uncle, the brother of their biological father, and fully qualified under Illinois family law. The judge listened, read the file, then did what family court judges always do in cases like this. She spoke directly to the children. "Lily, would you like to say anything to the court?" Lily stood from the back bench with sunshine held against her chest, because she had refused to leave the stuffed rabbit at home, then walked to the front of the courtroom. She wasn't even 4 feet tall, standing before the judge like she was standing before a mountain. But there was no fear in her eyes. Those were the eyes of the child who had snuck past security into the room of a comatose mafia boss and waved at a security camera. "Uncle Marcus isn't my dad," Lily said, her clear little voice carrying across the whole courtroom. "He's my uncle. My dad is in heaven now, so he can't come back. But Uncle Marcus is here. He came to get us when we were the most scared, and Miss Sarah is here too. Miss Sarah braids my hair and brings me hot chocolate when the food at the foster home is really yucky." A soft ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom. Lily didn't laugh. She was serious in the way only a 5-year-old can be serious. "Completely and absolutely. I want to live with Uncle Marcus, Tyler, and Miss Sarah because that's my family. My real family." The judge looked at Lily, looked at Marcus sitting on the bench with red eyes he didn't even try to hide, looked at Tyler sitting straight with his hand gripped tightly in his uncle's, then looked at Sarah behind them, biting her lip to keep from crying. She struck the gavel. Approved." Felicity slid the papers across the table for Marcus to sign. Marcus picked up the pen and his hand shook. Not because of muscle weakness after 11 weeks in a coma. That was behind him now. It shook because he was 38 years old, had signed thousands of contracts, hundreds of orders, documents that had decided the fate of other people with one stroke of ink. But he had never signed anything as important as this. He signed Tyler Chen, Lily Chen. The two children who had carried the name Chen, the name Daniel had kept to hide from his brother, were now carrying Chen again. Not because they were forced to, but because they chose it. When they stepped out of the courthouse, Lily held Marcus's right hand. Tyler held his left, and Sarah walked just behind them. As March sunlight in Chicago slanted across the front of the building and Lily tipped her face up to Marcus and asked, "Uncle, can we go home now?" Marcus looked down at her, and for the second time in his life, he smiled. "Yeah, let's go home." 6 months after leaving the hospital on a September evening when Chicago was just beginning to slip into autumn, and the air carried the scent of dry leaves mixed with ripe apples from the neighbor's yard. Marcus asked Sarah to come out to the backyard. He said there was something wrong with the fence and he wanted her to take a look because he didn't know anything about houses, which was true, since Marcus Chen had lived in a penthouse for 12 years and before that had never owned anything with a yard. Sarah stepped out through the back door and stopped. There was no broken fence. Instead, 20 handmade paper lanterns hung on strings from the porch roof to the maple tree in the corner of the yard, glowing softly in the falling dark. Each lantern had a crayon drawing taped to it, some with flowers, some with some with a round little rabbit with 2 black dots for eyes. And Sarah knew at once they were Lily's work, because no one in the world drew sunshine the way Lily did. Tyler stood beside the maple tree with the old phone Marcus had bought him the month before in his hand, pressing play on a song. "You Are My Sunshine" in a piano version, gentle with only the sound of the keys and no lyrics, drifted softly across the small yard. Lily sat on the back porch steps with sunshine in her lap, her legs swinging, grinning so hard with the face of a 5-year-old holding the biggest secret of her life and barely managing not to burst. Marcus stood in the middle of the yard beneath the lanterns, and for the first time Sarah saw him looking nervous. Not the kind of nervousness that comes from facing enemies or making life and death decisions. The kind that lives in a man holding something small in his hand and fearing he may not be good enough to offer it. "Sarah," he said, and his voice wasn't flat the way it usually was, but a little rough, a little unsteady. "I'm not good at saying these things, you know that. I'm good at giving orders, good at making threats, good at keeping quiet. But I'm not good at saying what I need to say to you tonight." He pulled a small black velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside wasn't a diamond ring. It was a simple silver band, and on the inside was engraved one single word, "Stay." Sarah looked at the ring, then at Marcus, and he saw her eyes begin to fill, though she wasn't crying yet. Not yet. She was trying to hold herself together. "That was the first word I said to you," Marcus said. "That night after I woke up, the children were asleep. You were about to leave, and I said, 'Stay.' I didn't know why I said it then, but now I do, because I wanted you to stay, not for one night, not for 1 month. Stay." Sarah cried. She didn't try to hold it back anymore. The tears slid down her cheeks and she nodded hard over and over, because she didn't trust her voice if she opened her mouth. Lily couldn't stand it anymore. She jumped off the porch steps, ran across the yard, flung herself into Sarah's arms. Ayrton shouted into the Chicago autumn night. "Miss Sarah is going to be Mama Sarah! Mama Sarah! Mama Sarah!" Tyler turned off the music and walked over. He didn't shout or jump, but he stood beside Marcus and gave a small nod. The kind of nod from a 7-year-old boy saying I approve without needing to use the words. 3 months later, the wedding took place in that same yard. Small. Not small because money was lacking, but small because Marcus didn't have many people he wanted to invite, and the ones he wanted there were already present. David stood beside Marcus as best man, though he looked more like a bodyguard than a best man, his 45-year-old face trying not to show emotion while the corners of his mouth kept twitching up and being pulled back down. Maria stood at the gate, half on guard and half holding a glass of wine, and her eyes red because of the wind, or so she claimed, and no one believed her. Mrs. Garcia sat in the front row, crying from the moment Sarah stepped out until the ceremony ended, using up half a box of tissues. Dr. Morrison sat beside Mrs. Garcia, sometimes handing her tissues, sometimes quietly wiping his own eyes. Lily was the flower girl, wearing the white dress Sarah had bought for her, holding a small bouquet in one hand and Sunshine tucked under the other arm because she had declared that Sunshine was also in the wedding party and no one dared argue. Tyler carried the rings on a small velvet pillow, walking with the solemn seriousness of a boy carrying out the most important duty of his life. And when he handed the ring to Marcus, his hand didn't shake, even though his lips were pressed tight. Marcus put the ring on Sarah's finger. Yes, and when it came time for the vows, he didn't read from paper. He looked at her, then at Tyler and Lily standing beside them, then back at her, and spoke. "I used to think power was the only thing that could protect you. I built an empire, I built walls. I turned myself into something no one would dare touch. And I was wrong, because when I was lying there, all of that power couldn't do anything. The thing that brought me back was a song, a worksheet, and a stubborn nurse who refused to leave when I told her to go. You and the children protected me with something my whole empire could never buy. I won't promise to be perfect, but I promise I'll stay." 2 weeks after the wedding, the Chen family drove to Milwaukee. 16 hours on the highway, Lily asleep in the back seat with Sunshine in her arms. Tyler reading a book for who knew how many times. Sarah driving half the distance because Marcus still hadn't been cleared by the doctor to stay behind the wheel too long, even though he argued that he was fine. The little cemetery sat just outside Milwaukee beneath the Wisconsin hills. Cold wind blowing across a field of winter-yellowed grass, 2 graves side by side. Daniel James Chen and Jennifer Louise Chen. 2 simple headstones with the grass around them neatly kept because someone from the local church still tended the place. Lily laid a bouquet of yellow daisies on her mother's grave. The flowers she said Jennifer had loved most because they looked like little sons. She sat in front of the grave and said, "Mama, I have a family now. Uncle Marcus looks so much like Dad, and Miss Sarah looks like you." Tyler placed a book on his father's grave. The book his father had given him, the only book he had carried with him when he left Milwaukee. He set it down, his hand trembling slightly, and said, "I finished it, Dad. I read it to your brother. He really liked it." Marcus knelt between the 2 graves, his knees pressing into the cold ground, and for the first time, he spoke to his brother without whispering, alone on a hospital balcony. "I kept my promise, Daniel. Your children are safe. Your children have a home, a school, people who love them. And I found the light, Daniel. Just like you said, I found it." The Wisconsin wind swept across the field, bitterly cold but clean, carrying the scent of pine and coming snow. Sarah stood behind him, one hand holding Lily's, the other resting on Tyler's shoulder, and watched Marcus kneeling before his brother's grave. The man all of Chicago at once feared, now only a brother apologizing for arriving too late. 1 year after the wedding, the red brick house in Lincoln Park no longer looked like the home Sarah had found online that day. The white wooden fence was now covered in climbing flowers Lily had planted in the spring and every morning before school. She watered them and talked to each bloom as though they could hear her. In the backyard stood a doghouse Tyler had built himself with Marcus's help, though help in this case meant Marcus held the boards steady while Tyler hammered the nails because it turned out a former Mafia boss was worse with a hammer than a 9-year-old boy. Inside that doghouse lived Buddy, the golden retriever Marcus had bought for Tyler on his birthday, named after the friendship that had saved them all. The Daniel Chen Foundation was born in the fall, exactly 1 year after Marcus signed the adoption papers for Tyler and Lily. David ran it. Felicity Crane handled the legal side, and Marcus personally went to Bright Futures to meet Mrs. Garcia and sign the first support agreement. Mrs. Garcia looked at the man standing before her, the man whose niece and nephew she had once unknowingly handed over to kidnappers, and she cried. Marcus said nothing about the past. He only said, "You took care of those children when no one else did. This foundation exists so you and people like you have enough resources that no child ever has to eat peanut butter sandwiches every day again." The foundation expanded faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months, 6 foster homes across Illinois received financial support, from improved meals to the hiring of additional child psychologists. And the name Daniel Chen, the man who had left to escape the darkness, was now tied to the light he had always believed his brother would one day find. Sarah went back to school in the spring semester. She finished the nursing degree she had abandoned 10 years earlier when her parents got sick, studying by day while the children were in school, reviewing lessons at night after everyone else had gone to bed. And Marcus would often wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to find his wife sitting at the kitchen table, books spread around her, a cup of coffee gone cold beneath her hand. He never told her to go to bed. He only poured her a fresh cup, placed it next to the old one, and went back upstairs. Sarah graduated at the top of her class and was appointed head nurse at Northwestern Memorial, on the very same 4th floor where she had once worked the night shift where everything had begun. On her first day in the role, she walked past room 412, now an ordinary patient room, no longer sealed off, no longer guarded, no longer covered in crayon drawings. She paused for 1 second, looked through the glass, smiled, and kept walking. Tyler wrote his first short story in English class at school. The teacher told the students to write about someone in their family, and the 9-year-old boy with solemn dark eyes wrote 4 pages titled, "My Uncle Slept for a Very Long Time." He wrote about a man lying in bed who wouldn't wake up, about 2 children sneaking past security every night, about a nurse who opened the door and let them in, about a song and a book, about fingers that moved, about eyes that opened, and about a family forming where no one expected one to exist. His teacher gave him an A+ and wrote at the bottom, "Tyler, this is the most beautiful story I've ever read from a 4th grade student. Thank you for sharing it." Tyler brought the paper home and handed it to Marcus to read. Marcus finished it, folded it closed, and said nothing for a long moment. Then he ruffled the boy's hair and said, "You wrote better than anything I've ever read. Your father would have been proud." Lily started 1st grade and quickly became the child who drew the most pictures in the class. She drew her family every day, each picture a little different, adding new details but always including everyone. The newest one hanging on the refrigerator had 6 figures in it: Marcus, and Sarah, Tyler, Lily, Sunshine, and one giant golden ball of fur taking up half the page, labeled Buddy the dog, because Lily wanted to make sure no one confused Buddy with anything else. And every night before bed, the ritual never changed. Lily lay in her room with the yellow walls, Sunshine tucked beneath her chin. Tyler lay in the room next door, Buddy curled at his feet, and Marcus sat in the space between both doorways with his back against the frame so both children could see him. Lily sang, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her 7-year-old voice was steadier now, clearer now, no longer trembling like the night she sang in the hospital room after being teased by the other children. No longer breaking the way it did when tears had run down her crayon-marked cheeks. Now she sang because she was happy. All because it was the song Jennifer had left behind. Because it was the song that had pulled Uncle Marcus out of the dark. And because it was her way of saying "I love you" to everyone without having to say the words aloud. Marcus sat there listening and smiled. Sarah stood at the end of the hallway with one shoulder against the wall, watching her husband sit between the bedrooms of the 2 children, listening to the lullaby with Sunshine resting on the pillow, and Buddy breathing softly at the foot of the bed. And she thought about that first night on the 4th floor of Northwestern Memorial, when she opened the door to room 412, and saw 2 children sitting on the floor beside the bed of a comatose Mafia boss, and she had said, 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes had turned into an entire life, and Marcus Chen, the man who had once made all of Chicago afraid, the man the world called a phantom, now sat inside a red brick house in Lincoln Park, listening to his daughter sing a lullaby, and understood that all the power, money, territory, and fear he had spread for 20 years had never been able to give him this. This had begun with 2 orphan children sneaking past security, one stubborn nurse who refused to call security, and a song sung to someone who was sleeping. That is the story of the Chen family. A story about how love doesn't need blood to begin, doesn't need perfection to endure, and doesn't need power to protect. It only needs one person willing to open the door, one person willing to stay, and the faith to believe that even in the deepest darkness someone is still singing to you. If this story has touched your heart, please press like to support us. Share this video with the people you love, and subscribe to the channel to hear more meaningful stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Do you believe that in real life, love can change even the people who seem impossible to change? Share your thoughts in the comments. We always want to hear what lives deep inside your heart. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and see you again in the next video.